Hello and welcome along to the Weather Studio Live. I'm Alex Deakin.
And I'm Aidan McGibbon. We're live, it's 1 p.m. We're broadcasting from the Met Office headquarters here in Exeter. Coming up this week, it's cold outside. Nothing unusual about that. It is, of course, the end of January. We do expect cold weather in this country sometimes. Cold enough for some snow, for some over the next couple of days. Not for everyone. Who is most likely to see snow? We'll be looking at that in detail. And we'll be looking at the forecast beyond the next few days. How long will it stay cold? How cold will it get? Will we see any milder weather? We'll be taking a look at that. Now, of course, weather forecasts are subject to change, particularly when you look beyond a week or so. And at the end of last week, there were some indications from computer models that it would be really cold by the end of this week. That is not happening. Some will be pleased. Some will be upset about that.
Very disappointed.
What happened to change that scenario? We'll be
Looking at
discussing that.
Yes, lots of interest going on over the past week or so, and the weather for the next week or so still looks very, very interesting indeed, particularly if you love snowfall. But please do get in touch. Send us your questions. We are live on YouTube. We are live on Facebook. We are live on Twitter. We'll try and answer some of the questions during the show, but still keep sending them in because we will answer some maybe next week, like we're doing now for last week, because we had some lovely questions in last week. A couple of them here. It's Only Me on YouTube. Well, this wasn't more of a question, it was more of a request. Please explain the jet stream and how it affects the UK. And as the jet stream is something we often talk about here on the Weather Studio, we'll try and explain little bits and pieces of it as we go along. But here's a suggestion for you, It's Only Me. Go to our sister channel, learn about weather, and on there there's all kinds of different videos about all kinds of different weather elements. And on there is one that is, what is the jet stream? So that will explain the basics of the jet stream. There's another one on there about jet streams from all around the world. And there's a whole host. We try and post one on there every week, a whole host of different little videos explaining all kinds of meteorological tricks and facts and interesting things about the weather. So that's a good place to go. Subscribe to that channel as well as subscribing to this channel as well.
Don't want to miss out. 72,000 views. 72,000 people have enjoyed that video. They cannot be wrong.
Mark Rees also asked a question last week during last week's show. Will the latest SSW, Southern Stratospheric Warming, influence our summer weather? Good question, Mark.
Something we've been asked a few times, actually, particularly in the context of last year's winter weather and the following summer, because, of course, last year was a busy year for us here at the Met Office. We had those freezing easterly winds at the beginning of March, and then what seemed like no time at all, we switched the freezing easterlies to very hot weather across the north of Europe, and some people joined the dots and thought that all of it was connected to this thing that we also saw towards the beginning of last year, a sudden stratospheric warming. Now, we've covered this a few times on the Weather Studio before, so we won't go into the details again, but basically, a sudden stratospheric warming is where the temperature way above the North Pole, 30 kilometres or so, shoots up in a few days in the middle of winter, and that can disrupt the wind circulation around the northern hemisphere, and as a result we end up with sometimes a weaker jet stream, and we are more likely to get northerlies and easterlies. Now, in the winter, a weaker jet stream brings those cold northerlies and easterlies. In the summer, we saw a weaker jet stream at the summer last year, and that brought hot, sunny weather. And so only naturally you think, right, okay, that sudden stratospheric warming must have then had influences through the following few months, March, April, May, and so on. But actually, it doesn't really have that big an influence on our summer weather. And here's the reason why. The polar vortex, which is this big cold pool above the North Pole, rotating low pressure above the North Pole, it forms during the autumn and early winter, and this is the temperature at 30 kilometres above the North Pole, and you can see the temperature falling away during the autumn months and into the start of winter. Now, that's when the polar vortex in the stratosphere above the North Pole forms. When you get this sudden stratospheric warming, which happens every couple of years or so, then the temperature, this is the average temperature, but the temperature rises, big spike. Now, we saw that in the winter last year. We've seen it again at the beginning of this year, and it disrupts that wind circulation. But every year, regardless of whether you get a stratospheric warming suddenly in the middle of winter or not, every year during the spring anyway, the temperature rises, the polar vortex in the stratosphere above the North Pole breaks down.
So the months are along the bottom here, just in case you can't see that on the screen. This is the summer months here. You get that rise in temperature anyway. There's no polar vortex in the summer, so there's no link between sudden stratospheric warming and summers. That's what we had last year, but there's no link.
Because, of course, there are other influences on the jet stream. It's not just about how warm the stratosphere above the North Pole gets and that wind circulation. There are other influences, and that's one of the reasons why you do get a more powerful jet stream during the autumn and the winter, because it is enhanced by this circulation surrounding the North Pole in the stratosphere. We've seen it break down, but there are these other things that influence the jet stream.
Short answer, Mark, no.
That was about as short
as you can get.
As you can get.
It's a complicated issue. But a lot of people are asking about sudden stratospheric warming. We've talked about it a lot, and people are saying, "Oh, what's happened to sudden stratospheric warming?" But it's still happening, isn't it? And the weather is still consistent with that we're seeing at the moment. So sudden stratospheric warming has happened. That's definitely happened. We saw the temperature rise. That's happened, and it is influencing our weather. Not necessarily giving us a beast from the east.
No, because it doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen. And consistently since the end of last year, we talked about the increased likelihood of cold spells from around the middle of January because of a slower, more undulating jet stream. And that's more or less what we've seen. The weather has turned colder. It's just not been particularly crazy for
a couple of good questions already coming in. Thanks for those. Stuart Frew on Periscope. Stuart Frew 1983 says, do you actually know what the jet stream will do now? We'll have more on the jet stream in just a moment and its position, how it's influencing our weather in just a moment. And Chandru Bojwani on Twitter asks, my kids want to know, when will it snow in central London? I wonder why. After a snow day, perhaps? Well, they could see a little bit today. I mean, there's snow, sleet and snow showers all around the country. In fact, we've got some evidence of snow. If you haven't seen any yet, then, well, we have seen some in places today, mostly over hills, it has to be said, and mostly in northwestern parts of the UK, because that's where our winds are coming from. We have a beautiful photograph here of Saddleworth Moor sent in by one of the mums from the people who work upstairs. John West.
We've got some talented mums.
We have got some talented mums. Beautiful shot here of Saddleworth Moor this morning. And we've been sent some pictures on Snapchat as well. Follow us on Snapchat and send us in your pictures. This is a beautiful one from Western Bartonshire of Alexandria. Ali B sent this picture in. Everyone loves a dog on social media. Not quite sure what the dog's name, but it's sort of merging in with the background. So yes, we have seen some snow. Been quite a bit in Glasgow this morning, actually. These images from G77, the postcode of snow falling. There was a little feature that moved through, but a lot of the scenes are like this, just a light covering in places, not causing mass disruption, not creating any school closures or anything like that. And that's the kind of snow that we're going to continue to see. We will continue to have wintry hazards for the next 24 hours or so. There are plenty of snow showers around, and almost anywhere could see one, but for snow to be settling, we're looking at hills, really, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right. So the size of the precipitation particles here, to make it obvious, stands out, but it probably looks a bit more than it is. Today is a showery day, particularly for western areas, early afternoon. The showers are coming in from the west. Lots of sunshine out there. Beautiful, crisp winter's day for eastern parts of Scotland into eastern England. This is 2 p.m. this afternoon, so you can see showers moving in, mainly affecting western areas. Now, these showers at low levels around coast, rain, sleet, hail, proper mixture of what we call wintry showers, above about 200 metres, so plenty of the hills in the west, snowfall and snow building up on some of the tops. Now, there's this feature that we're keeping an eye on through the rest of Tuesday. If we play it forward there, we're looking at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. That's when it passes through London, heads into East Anglia and Kent then for the early evening. And once the sun starts dipping, of course, the ground temperatures will start cooling off. And even at lower levels, we could see some sleety stuff, maybe even some snow. It's going to be a proper mixture,
It's really difficult. Snow is really tricky to forecast in these scenarios. And we talk about these wintry showers, sleet and snow, because a subtle difference in intensity makes a difference between whether it falls as snow, it hits the ground as snow, sleet or rain. Very subtle differences, and of course any elevation, any higher up you get, then you change in the temperature, so it's more likely to be snow. So it's really in the balance with forecasting snow. It's one of the biggest headaches. Most of us forecasters love talking about snow, we love it, but actually we have a kind of love-hate relationship with it because it's really hard to forecast and nail it down. So we talk about these wintry showers, and that's what it'll be really, a mixture of rain, sleet and snow, and you could see it, but it's not expected to cause big problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be widespread disruptive snow for London and rush hour, but it could be one of those where it starts raining and then it gets heavier. You see big flakes of snow falling through the sky, maybe even settling on some grassy bits, particularly if you're a bit higher over the Chilterns or whatever. Now, once that clears through, of course, temperatures are falling away, clear skies, The greater issue then is ice for much of the country, because we've got these showers piling in. We've got the legacy of this clearing away from the southeast, so some slippery surfaces about.
It's a nightmare for gritters as well. A classic nightmare scenario for gritters, because they go out and they grit the roads, put the salt down, but of course then you get a shower and it washes it all off, and then it showers again and it refreezes, and so it's a real tricky situation for gritters out there. This is a classic situation where it's really tricky, and they have to grit maybe several times in a night, certain road networks.
Yeah, exactly. Once that's cleared away from the southeast, though, we start off Wednesday with most of the showers returning to western areas, so western Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, into, say, western fringes of England. And again, there'll be a mixture: rain, sleet, hail at lower levels. Didn't mention the thunder and lightning that we could have in places out to the west of the UK through today. And eastern areas, beautiful start today, blue skies, cold though, a widespread frost. Let's put on a few temperatures. Now, these are the temperatures at 8 a.m. in towns and cities, so they're hovering around freezing, but in sheltered rural areas, well below freezing. Scotland minus double digits.
Could be the coldest night of the winter so far. We broke that the other night, 2 nights ago, I think, in Scotland. Minus 10.8, I think, is the current. But don't quote me on that. But we could get something similar tonight, so we'll keep you updated on that one. And then Wednesday, what's happening? It's not as many showers.
Not as many.
Many places, beautiful, sunny, crisp day, but there are showers around.
See a few showers around eastern areas, but a lot of them will be out to the west. And then a big change coming in later on Wednesday. You can see the cloud thickening up there for Northern Ireland, so that's indicative of some different weather.
Yeah, we'll have more on the outlook. A lot of people asking about the outlook. We'll have more on that in just a moment. What are we looking at here, Aidan?
This is 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. So this is a lying snow map. It's purely data, so needs to be taken with a pinch of salt. Our chief meteorologist upstairs has been talking about what he expects based on this, but also based on, if you had a pinch of salt, you'd take away half the snowfall from here. So I wouldn't take these amounts literally, but it just gives an indication there. The brighter colours are the deeper snow areas, western parts of Scotland, over the hills.
Basically picking out all where the mountain ranges are, isn't it? It's quite nicely, really.
Even Dartmoor there.
Gaps. Yeah.
Bit of a covering. But also we've got a few patches of light blue across the Midlands into eastern England, just here and there. So it just indicates, I wouldn't take this too literally, where the locations are of these, just indicates that,
again, it's centimetre, less than a centimetre, is not going to cause any problems, not really going to cause, you're not going to make your school be closed, which is what a lot of people are interested in, isn't it? Not enough to build a snow map, sadly. But yeah, interesting. There is some snow around. Any more questions coming in? I'm just going to check my phone, see if we had any more questions coming in. Are we getting the beast from the east again? We'll have more on that in just a moment. There are not in the sort of short to medium term, no, but longer range SSW has still happened, and as we talked about earlier, it doesn't reform, so it's likely to stay cold into February.
Long range forecasts
again,
snow and cold. Yeah, we'll be talking more about that in just a moment. But to whet your appetite, I thought you might enjoy this. Nothing to do with our weather. This is off Alaska, of course. They get snow in Alaska. Nothing unusual about that. It's just mesmerising, isn't it? It's a beautiful.
You just really like
snow. I just like it.
Beautiful on a boat. The snow gently coming down. Oh, so if you haven't got snow, this is our sort of gesture to you. This is what you could have won. But this isn't Alaska, but elsewhere in the United States, we have seen some serious wintry weather recently over the past couple of days. Big winter storm, and this is ice glaze, Pennsylvania. Bernadette sent this photo, put this photo on social media. She's a meteorologist in the United States, and this is basically freezing rain. When the rain comes down, the surfaces are below freezing, and it just freezes on impact and creates this huge ice glaze. So treacherous conditions in parts of the east of the US.
We had that.
We had freezing rain.
Beginning of December across parts of northern England, southern Scotland. Some of you might have experienced that. We also had it when we had that beast from the east at the beginning of March in Devon.
Yeah,
we saw that.
Saw it outside.
Glaze.
Amazing. I hadn't seen it before that thick across the UK. It's reasonably rare in the UK. They get it more in the US, but it is reasonably rare in the US. But this US storm, I know we get a lot of people commenting on this show. Why are you talking about the USA and we're talking about the UK? But actually, this is relevant to our weather and the sequence of the chain of events that's happened over the recent weeks.
We're all connected, and this chain of events is connected via the jet stream. What happens in North America doesn't necessarily just pick itself up and move across the Atlantic and end up here. That's not quite how it works, but it does work by influencing the shape and the position of the jet stream, and that's exactly what we've seen over the last week. Now, I just wanted to show this graphic, which is a forecast that we put out around the middle of last week, and it shows how these events are connected. So we had weather going on in the west of the US, some rain. That then forms a new lower pressure, and remember, this is Saturday, so this is the weekend just gone. That low pressure then moves.
The winter storm we've just seen.
And it then clashes with this Arctic air, a real cold blast coming down to North America. And the cold air digs south, energizing the jet stream and buckling it. And this is why and how it's all connected to our weather, because then you have the jet stream pushing north across the Atlantic, heading up almost as far as Greenland, and we get something called downstream amplification. What goes north must come down, or what goes up must come down, and what we've seen is the cold air then coming down. So this is the forecast from last week for the beginning of this week, and indeed we have ended up with the jet stream to our south as we've started this week, and cold air. But because this chain of events is so highly dependent on weather that's thousands of miles away, and subtle changes at the very beginning can then influence the behaviour of the jet stream, of course we emphasised the uncertainty. So what we did was we showed that the jet stream position and shape was likely to change, bringing us colder weather, but we couldn't give that much confidence on the exact details.
We were basically forecasting a week ahead, and because people were talking about it, and it's that time of year, and people are excited about snow, and people want to know. So we put this chain of events to suggest what could happen across the UK, and that did happen. We've seen the storm in the US. We did get the jet stream amplifying and that big, but we've now moved on. And forecast for later this week.
At the end of last week, we were also seeing signs from a lot of the computer models, quite a strong signal for forecasting 7 days ahead. We're seeing signs that that amplification in the jet stream, the waviness, would become even more enhanced for the end of this week. So this was a forecast for 7 days' time, looking at this coming Friday, and it was suggesting that the jet stream, a lot of the computer models were suggesting the jet stream would do that sort of thing, way up towards Iceland, and then dive south again across the UK. Cold, easterly winds, much colder than average.
In here, this is a trough. So this is the jet stream. In here, you get a trough, and that's often a breeding ground for low pressure systems. And if you get a low in here, that would allow then the easterly winds to come in. It would have been a proper easterly wind.
So this was an indication, a strong indication compared to a lot of the signs that we see from computer models looking at 7 days' time. Now, when I started at the Met Office, only 10, 11 years ago...
And the rest.
We wouldn't have that much certainty on the forecast 4 or 5 days ahead.
Yeah.
We'd barely mention it in our forecast. We barely discuss it. Now we are pretty confident most of the time, 4, 5, 6 days. It's when we start to get to 7 to 10 days that we can often pick out the broad themes, cold or mild, rainy, dry, that sort of thing. But it's the detail and the fact that we're looking at 7 days ahead and all of these things are quite complicated. Yeah, we're never quite...
Well, this is now the forecast for Friday, and it's not that different. It's only a subtle shift, right?
Yeah.
So all those chain of events has to happen, and then you've got this. This is actually what we're expecting to happen now on Friday, and we're on the milder side of the jet. The jet is just not as amplified, so it's a subtle change in that amplification. It means it's all shifted a little bit further, and so we're now on the mild side. So that subtle change and a chain of events that's going on, it makes a big impact in the UK, and so that's as good as we can do at the moment. When the indications are that it's more likely to be like that, we'll suggest to people that it could be because a lot of people find it useful. The heads up. There's businesses that rely on that kind of thing that we give forecasts for, and they find it useful. Obviously, we can't nail down details of snow and where it's likely to be, and then you can get these changes, and it's only a subtle change in the bigger picture of the atmosphere right around the globe, but it then does have a big impact on
It's not just the Met Office computer model we look at. We look at Met Office model, we look at models from all around the world, and each model has 50 different runs where they alter the starting conditions very slightly. It's called ensemble forecasting, run it forward. And what we were seeing last week, both of these scenarios were suggested in the computer models. 80% of them were saying that, about 20% were going with that. Now, any statistician will tell you that if there's an 80% chance of one thing happening and a 20% chance of the other, the 20% chance thing will happen 1 out of 5 times. It's not like that is going to happen every time. So unfortunately, in this situation, or fortunately because it's likely to lead to less disruption, then this 20% likely scenario from the end of last week has ended up being the most likely now looking at this Friday. What does that mean? Well, again, it's all down to a chain of events. We've got this North America winter storm at the beginning of this week, and you can see how the jet stream, like I was mentioned, becomes amplified. Cold air plunges south, jet stream buckles, heads right up there to Greenland and Iceland, and then we've got the cold air through Tuesday and Wednesday. That's where we are now. But what has happened, and a very subtle change right over on the other side of the Atlantic, is that when the jet stream dives south there, if you remember from GCSE geography, when you have a river doing that, sometimes it makes a shortcut across there and you get an oxbow lake. And that's what's happened. Rather than carrying on diving south and moving north and becoming very amplified, what we've seen is the jet stream just cut off like that, and it flattens the whole pattern. And instead of having mild air pushing up there and cold air down there, we've seen mild air move from the west. And it's as simple as that.
Yeah, simple as that. So it is turning a bit mild across the UK later this week. Basically, that warmer air is slowly pushing across the country, and we'll notice it by Friday. So frosts tonight, that risk of ice, still a few wintry showers around tomorrow. It gradually turns a bit milder during Thursday. The milder air will gradually be pushing in, but still a frost on Thursday morning. But then if we play through, we can look at Friday's chart and see how the warmer air is gradually seeping in towards the UK.
So this is Thursday. Thursday's the day of change. It will start off cold, but as rain moves in, again, could see some snow over the hills, but eventually by Friday, we're into something called a warm sector. So it's a slice of Atlantic air. It's coming in from the west, and it's bringing with it less cold air and, well, a lot of cloud, some rain, and so on. And so, yeah, that's how we end the week, in a very different shape to how we start the week. A few questions have come in, haven't they?
It might get a bit colder again, as we'll see in just a moment. Yeah, we've had some great questions in. Please do keep them going. When does spring start? Well, that depends whether you're a meteorologist. Meteorologically speaking, it starts on the 1st of March. But I suggest perhaps Mesto 7, you probably want to know just when it's going to get a little bit warmer. And there's no real signs of that, actually, are there? Look, the longer range into February, it may well stay cold. Thanks for your question there, coming in on YouTube. Stuart Frew again, seems this winter you and every other forecaster is struggling to pinpoint an outlook. Well, I think that's the longer range, as Aidan was talking about. Yes, the longer range has been difficult to pinpoint in terms of detail, but that's always going to be the case. I think in the shorter term, the forecast has been spot on, and the overall theme for a cold has come to fruition. You know, we said because of SSW, more likely to be cold. It has been cold. The real cold, the severe, the beast from the east, if you like, hasn't happened. But then that's not always going to happen. But I think it's a bit harsh to say, pinpointing the outlook. But you're looking sort of 6-7 days ahead, 8, 9, 10 in some cases. That's always going to be tricky. But the shorter range forecasts are still very accurate and have been.
What we can always say when you're looking at 1-2 months down the line is that some of the factors that influence the active or inactive jet stream are in play or not in play. And so because of those circulation patterns above the North Pole, what we can say is that something that often enhances the jet stream in winter has gone missing for the rest of winter. But there are lots of other things, and for example, one of them is just the fact that although the jet stream moves areas of low pressure around the globe, those areas of low pressure also feed back and influence the shape of the jet stream. So these things are feeding back in amongst themselves and become increasingly complicated to model after 5-7 days or so.
Let's have a look at what might happen next week, because most of the computer models now agreeing as we go into next week, particularly through the weekend, although we get milder through Friday, that milder is not expected to stick around. There's some uncertainty about the position of this low. So this is a European Centre model, the EC model, as we go through the weekend and into next week. There's some uncertainty about this low. It could be a little bit more intense than that, but it does look as like it'll shift through. And as it shifts through, well, the colder air follows in behind. So you can see the UK here. This is the forecast for Saturday, midday, Sunday, midday, Monday and Tuesday. And this is the broad pattern of that. Look at there, look at the colours. What are they telling you? Well, basically telling you it's going to be on the cold side. But none of these scenarios, or none of these pictures are showing us an easterly wind. That doesn't look likely now into the early part of next week. It's cold, but it's more the northwesterly cold.
Like today.
Like today. So the showers are more likely to be across northwestern areas coming down. The influence is still from the Atlantic, with milder air at times trying to push in. Now, actually, that's more of a headache for us forecasters when you get cold westerlies, because as we talked about earlier, then it's the rain, snow balance. It's always on a knife edge. It's always difficult to pinpoint. Actually, when you get an easterly, it becomes a bit easier for us forecasters because it gets so cold that anything falling out of the sky is definitely going to be snow. So in these scenarios, there will be this wintry shower, mixed sleet, snow definitely over hills coming into western areas, and that's what we're basically looking at into next week. So staying on the cold side, nothing exceptional. Temperature's probably only a bit below average. You'll notice it more at night, but there will be wintry showers, most likely coming into western parts, and at times, as I say, these slightly milder conditions try and push in, but they never last that long. So the outlook into the middle of next week, staying on the cold side. Widespread heavy snow at this stage looks unlikely, but there will be some, chiefly in the west. You will have more with a 10-day trend tomorrow. Our 10-day trend forecast that goes on Facebook and YouTube will be recorded about this time tomorrow and will be available. And we'll have a bit more detail and probably look a little bit beyond that as well.
So this is as far as we can go in terms of giving you a likely wind direction, where our weather's coming from. After that, as I mentioned, one of the key drivers of the jet stream has weakened. And so what we expect is, because of a weaker jet stream, there is a greater likelihood of weather patterns like this, winds from the north or winds from the east. But until we get to 7, maybe up to 10 days ahead of a potential easterly, we really cannot give any details in terms of, whether we're going to get one in the first week of February, or, how much snow we're going to get around the middle of February. We can't do that now. No one can, and we never have been able to.
The effects of SSW are basically, you're saying the effects of SSW are still in play, and it could still happen. There's still a long way to go in winter. But in the medium term, short to medium term, it's cold, but it's not going to be an easterly until we get to beyond next week. Any more questions coming in? We can probably have a quick look. Are we going to get a repeat of last winter's snow? As I said, just a bit too early to say. But going back to our other channel, Learn About Weather,
yes.
We posted. This is a cool thing you posted last week.
This is something that went out on Friday. Now, some of you might have seen the blood moon earlier this week. The moon is around 400 times smaller in diameter compared to the sun, and we have a similar ratio with cloud drops and raindrops.
Wow, stat time.
Take a look at this. That's a cloud droplet, and then we zoom out, and we've got a small raindrop, drizzle, and then we've got a large raindrop, and it keeps getting bigger. It's just a thing of beauty.
What's that? That's a hail. That's a damaging hail.
25 millimetres. That's how the Americans define damaging hail. And then the largest hailstone on record, 20 centimetres. Zooming back in again. There we've got damaging hail. We've got a largest raindrop on record, Brazil. Marshall Islands as well.
They recorded the largest raindrop on record.
Yeah,
How do they measure that?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, but anyway, this video is available on our Learn About Weather YouTube channel, so go and follow that once this is over. Again, give it the thumbs up. You can subscribe to that. Another thing that is being recorded this afternoon, our Mostly Weather podcast is back, episode 28. Hoping to do this a bit more regularly in the coming months. Once a month is what we're aiming for. Claire will be taking part in that and recording that, so that should be available. The Mostly Weather podcast should be available on Thursday, so check out where you get your podcast from, and it should be available on there if you do a search for Mostly Weather. But also follow us across the rest of social media, Facebook. I say we have some great snaps in on Snapchat this morning as well, and on Instagram, Twitter. All the latest weather warnings coming out all the time from the Met Office. Any signs of significant snow, heavy snowfall, well, you will hear it here first.
Just before we go, really interesting question here. Do sudden stratospheric warmings happen over the South Pole and influence Southern Hemisphere weather? I know the answer to this one.
Good.
Now, in 50 years of research, there have been about 25 observed SSWs above the North Pole. In the similar time frame, how many have occurred above the South Pole?
3.
one. Just one. And it's simply because of the distribution of continents around the South Pole. The air circulation surrounding the South Pole is less interrupted. That's the simple answer. And so SSW, sudden stratospheric warmings, are less common above the South Pole.
Bit of info. All those people who've stayed right to the very end,
Just to hear the
half an
answer
hour
to
in.
that.
Thanks
Well
for sticking
done.
with us, and it was definitely worth it for that last one. But thank you very much for watching. Thanks for sending in your questions. Keep sending in your questions. We'll try and answer some more next week, and we will see you again next week. Thanks for watching.